to review The Running Man by Stephen King, specifically the 40th anniversary edition. I'm doing this because I was disappointed in other reviews of Bachman books. It seems like the depth of criticism went as far as it's a solid book, good story, before they'd move on to the next one. So what I will do is three main things. Qualify myself as a reader and a Stephen King fan so you can decide if you trust my judgment or not. Give you some insights into what the book tries to do, what it does well, and what it does not so well, in my opinion. And explore three thoughts that this book provoked in me, larger considerations that resulted from it. Good writing does this, and that makes me happy. What I won't do is spoil anything or give you a systematic point-by-point breakdown of the plot. This is a tendency of many YouTube reviewers, and I hate them for it. I should also say that I assume you're at least familiar enough with the concept of the Running Man that I don't have to tell you the framework or the story or framework of the story or details of the future that it takes place in. That's what the book is for. You know the thing. It's a guy that we're supposed to get behind as he's being chased by people that are trying to kill him for sport, all for the entertainment of the mass public on television. So also, finally, it won't be a breakdown of the differences between the book and the movie. Really, there's a lot of good videos of that already up there. I think Minty's Comedic Arts was one I saw recently that was great. Starts with some quotes, some nice review quotes. Yeah, they're all about Stephen King. They're not about the book. They're all very general. Stephen King is a great author. Then you get a title page. Then you get the first page of the story. There's no foreword. There's no introduction. There's no words from other authors, like you would see in like early Stephen King stuff. There's no introduction from the author. There's no details about the 40th anniversary edition because it's not. There's nothing. It's just the bare minimum they could publish of The Running Man.
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh.
Stephen King doesn't care about this book. And evidently his publisher doesn't care about this book either. Let me remind myself what the copyright date is, 1982. Okay? So this is one that's been in his rearview mirror for a long time. Not a big priority for him. Obviously, he wrote it as Richard Bachman, not even as Stephen King. Probably not the kind of thing that he really cares to revisit or get behind or promote. These days, he's got more important things to do, and his style has changed a lot since then. I've been disappointed by podcast episodes I've heard in this sort of Stephen King podcast genre that I kind of jump in and out of every now and then. I've been disappointed by the fact that the guests and the hosts are a bit whiny about it and precious about, how harsh it is. I choose to believe their professed squeamishness and pearl-clutching is an indicator of something deep inside themselves that they do not want to be outed for and definitely not judged for.
Oh, fuck yeah.
I can read this and say, well, I'm glad he moved past this phase because it would get tiring, quite frankly, if more of his work was similar to this. And I could just enjoy myself. This is not the Stephen King who writes long tales of a small community and the interlocking relationships of families and friends there punctuated with short episodes of horror or tragedy. I'm thinking of like From a Buick 8 or Revival or other 21st century King works. The post, I'm retiring after I'm finished with The Dark Tower, Stephen King, that we all, are very aware of nowadays. This is meaner. This is nasty. This has got some real serious. It's not just grit. It is mean-spirited stuff in it, and I'm not put off by that. But I wouldn't buy more than a few books like that from this, from one writer. I don't think. However, I don't know if that's entirely true because I'm really enjoying some James Ellroy. And that's pretty mean-spirited stuff. Mean-spirited world, mean-spirited characters. That happens, in life. I heartily recommend this book for anyone who loves Stephen King's early violent work, but would happily venture outside of this horror themed stuff. Because it's not a horror story per se. But if you love a bit of gore, if you love the way Stephen King does gore, There's a very rewarding sequence towards the end of this book that had me verbally, just involuntarily blurting out things like "Gah!" and "Jesus!" and "Yeah!" while alone on my couch over there to no one else's ears. But you got to wait a while to get to it. Overall, I think this book appeals to the action-oriented fan more than horror or sci-fi. When it comes to his use of language, the prose is obviously not from his greatest era, but it shows where he was going. He has fun with a few flourishes here and there without succumbing to any ego-driven desire to impress you with his over-familiarity with Roget's thesaurus. Is it Roget? I don't know. I went to public school and community college. To illustrate this, I will review some quotes from the text that I don't think give away any real spoilers. One short example: they traveled north through autumn, burning like a torch. I don't know what that means. It's evocative of some imagery in your head, though. An older man with silvery barbershop hair. I don't know what barbershop hair means. Wearing Madras shorts that came down over his knees, ran out to the edge of the road. He was carrying a huge camera with a Cobra-like telephoto lens. I don't know how a long lens is like a Cobra. It's black and it's long like a Cobra, I suppose, but a Cobra is something that we envision dancing around. A telephoto lens is very rigid and still. I don't know. There's a lot of description that he was not into later, soon after this, I would say. I think even in his book on writing, he talks about not wanting to overly dictate to the reader the visual characteristics of too many things when not necessary. He began snapping pictures wildly, bending and dipping. His legs were fish belly white. So that sentence is like, okay, his legs are really white. They're really pale as a fish's belly. I think more of a frog's belly when I think of white underbelly. You know, there's a lot of fish out there that aren't white at all. I don't know which. I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head that are big enough for you to see to flip them over and see a belly. I'm used to the ones that are just sort of like a wedge sort of shape that, you know, or like a oval kind of thing. Not that they have a big bloated underside. So yeah, I don't think that's a slam dunk, but it only takes me out of the story for a second to make me go, And then a little detail here that I enjoyed. I didn't mean to mouth off, he said unwillingly. That's Donahue. Richards thought he could peg him. That's not peg in the modern sense. You know, going in there from behind. That's a figure somebody out. I've got him pegged. You know, I know what he's all about. Well-off young men with a lot of free time often spent much of it roaming the shabby pleasure areas of the big cities, roaming in well-heeled packs, sometimes on foot, more often on choppers. They were queer stompers. Queers, of course, had to be eradicated. Save our bathrooms for democracy. They rarely ventured beyond the twilight pleasure areas into full darkness of the ghettos. When they did, they got the shit kicked out of them. 1982. Talking about people's sexuality and needing them to be banned from certain bathrooms. Didn't think that was a purely modern phenomenon, did you? Let's see. There was one I dog-eared over here when he's having a conversation with somebody from the games network, talking about how rigged certain things are and how skewed and biased the media is. This is another one of those futuristic stories where, unlike what we actually saw happen after this era, the media is like all one source. You know, it's called Freevee, and it's spelled the same way that app on your Roku TV is spelled, strangely enough. It's like how they have Soylent food, meal replacement beverage things these days. It's like Palantir is this really evil spying software platform thing. All these people, all these like weirdo scumbags that want to destroy our entire society are naming their thing after the pop culture thing that was an indication of corruption and the downfall of society. Anyways, tangent. Sorry. Didn't have that in my notes. Ben Richards is talking about the potential for, you know, him and these other characters in opposition to him to all get basically blown up for the sake of the TV show. And he says, with you're crazy. They blow us apart. And Richard says, with you and 5 other innocent people on board this honorable country, it will be a mistake, this character said harshly, a mistake on purpose. Don't you watch the National Report? Richards asked, still smiling. We don't make mistakes. We haven't made a mistake since 1950. I always enjoy that kind of political commentary, let's say. And then this one, I bought this book used. Someone had actually underlined this little bit and put a star next to it. It really resonated with them, apparently. Their names came and repeated, clanging in his mind like bells, like words repeated until they are reduced to nonsense. Say your name over 200 times and discover you are no one. Grief was impossible. He could only feel a fuzzy sense of embarrassment. Anyways, I won't read any more straight out of the book. Anything more in depth than that would be spoilery, and I did what I just did in order to simply give you some samples of the prose, where Stephen King's at as a writer at that point in his career.
I'm in business. I'm putting it down there.
I'm not a man that loves to read fiction. Stephen King, James Ellroy, this one's my favorite of all the fiction I've ever read. I'm too busy wrapped up, in books like this or this or this or this or this. You see where I'm going? This is not nonfiction. Historical stuff, though not all that scholarly. Okay? I'm not saying I'm too good to read fake stories. I'm just saying what fake stories I do read are pretty few and far between. And the reason is that I'm obsessed with more factual stuff, though not anything that you could do a master's thesis on. I'm a total dirtbag with no great standards to speak of when it comes to presenting myself as a critic of fiction and prose, is what I'm saying.
Blow your mind when you see kooky gals with their bodies painted by a new...
Running Man's a sizable novel. I was pleasantly surprised by how much it wasn't just some throwaway, trashy short story. It doesn't get bogged down in world building or sci-fi tech, even though it takes place in the future. And there are hover cars, but they're just sort of mentioned as a matter of fact, because you spend a bit of time in a few of them during this cross-country chase. This is not the kind of story you want to imagine yourself in, unlike, say, The Dark Tower. I wouldn't say it has a lot of heart. You're going to feel like an outsider as you read this. It's not... It was a blast to jump in and out of whenever I had time to pick it up. I'll say that. But I didn't feel like I was a part of it or I was immersed in any way. You feel more like a voyeur or a bystander. If I have anything negative to truly say about it, something that's an actual problem, as opposed to just things that weren't to my taste or preference, which is, I think, what most reviewers do, there's things that could be fleshed out better to get us more invested in the whole story and make us feel less like voyeurs in a half power fantasy and half montage of suffering. Like, there's a character that only appears towards the end who makes mention of how invested in Ben Richards' progress he's been and what it meant to his own decision making while Ben Richards' flight away from, his pursuers was being observed and tracked. It's a lot of tell with no show. If we had been in on those scenes of the inner workings at the Games Network along the way, this confrontation would have had a better payoff, and I would have been a lot cooler. If I haven't outed myself as a Dark Tower fan enough, I am a huge Dark Tower fan, and that was one of the cool things about the Man in Black or Randall Flagg along the way. You got to see things he was doing to try to set up failure for your protagonist. Now, that is one thing the movie does a better job of than the book, though the movie has to throw out most of the book in order to do that.
Hellfire! Hellfire! All right.
To touch more on my Stephen King preferences, there's stuff that I would call, like, there's... The Running Man is a weird little chunk of his work. It comes at a transitional time in his career. It's not like It or The Stand, which for me are wonderful, great stories, long, far-reaching stories with characters I'm invested in and a very unsatisfying ending as a result of magical feelings or gods intervening. Now everything's fine. But it's also, this book is also not one of his, it's not like his ghastly short stories that have no care at all for giving you a happy ending. Like One for the Road, I'm thinking of Everything's Eventual, I'm thinking of Graveyard Shift, Trucks, The Mangler. Those are all just badass little stories that have horrible things happening to people and then they're over. They're over without any real resolution necessarily. Sometimes it's just like bad things happened. The good guys tried to intervene. Oh, they failed. Everyone's dying anyways. Or they're just like Trucks and Everything's Eventual. They end with the main character going, then this is about to happen. I sure hope it's the outcome I want it to be, if you know what I mean. If you before Dinky, was it, hits send on that email, or when the main character in Trucks, the Maximum Overdrive story, looks up into the sky and hopes that the jet that he's seeing is actually piloted by a person and not just controlled, unmanned, controlled by the forces that have been attacking them and killing them all night. And the story doesn't tell you. There's elements of this that reminded me of Death Race 2000, the original movie. That transcontinental race is being judged by how many points the drivers rack up for murdering civilians with their cars. It also, parts of it remind me of First Blood, David Morrell's novel that became obviously the Sylvester Stallone franchise. Like both First Blood and Running Man have a miserable physical crawl through the muck, a very confined, claustrophobic sort of scene. The one man pitted against his entire environment concept, the people, the society, and the surrounding physical environment are all working against him. Whether it's John Rambo or it's Ben Richards. There's also a bit where the main character has to rely upon, ingratiating himself to some strangers that are also outcasts, that are also marginalized people. The hill-dwelling mountain man character in First Blood versus an impoverished black family in the ghetto in Running Man. I'm simply drawing parallels here. I'm not implying one author was influenced by the other guy. I'm assuming they were both influenced by earlier works that did something similar. Now, more of my Stephen King bona fides for background. I'm the kind of fan that was introduced to Richard Bachman while waiting for the last Dark Tower book to come out. I ended up reading Desperation, which is a Stephen King book, and The Regulators, which was a return to Bachman for him. Both of those came out in, I think, the late 1990s, early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. And this doesn't even, speaking of The Regulators, this doesn't even have the fake Richard Bachman bio that The Regulators does, where, there's just sort of winking at you going, yeah, we know it's Stephen King, but come on. Here's a little blurb about the author and clearly a photo of a younger Stephen King. I've only recently read Christine for the first time. That was last autumn. Had a ball with it. Obviously, it's one of my favorite John Carpenter movies. I'm very aware of the age-old conversations about which Stephen King adaptations make good movies while still being true to the source material. It's a whole thing that maybe I can get into in another video, but suffice it to say that I think The Running Man could have been adapted in a more faithful way, in a grittier way. I wouldn't mind if they just remade that movie once a year in different forms, but I digress. Let's move back to other concerns that I wanted to cover. Let's see. About my Stephen King fandom, my opinions. I've read The Gunslinger at least 5 times. I've read It at least 5 times. I popped big when Richie Tozier and Beverly Marsh showed up in 11/22/63. And in this book, The Running Man, I popped big when the town of Derry is featured as an important point along the path of Ben Richards. Not that anything connected to Derry, occurs plot-wise. There's no like winking there's no comments that would presage the appearance of Pennywise or anything like that. Let's talk about Ben Richards. Ben Richards is a miserable guy who could have had a better life in a different time. But the income disparity and classism that rules the country has made him bitter and hateful. The society is still racist and sexist and homophobic, so buckle up for some slurs here and there from various characters that appear along the way. Doesn't mean our hero is given a pass for his, let's say, shitty attitudes from time to time, or that the book wants us to like him for it. It wants us to sort of root for him in spite of, him having some... I think the book wants that, at least. I'm projecting, maybe. Despite him having some really shitty thoughts.
No.
I'll say this. This book is a slam dunk if you want to buy a copy for your weirdo uncle or father-in-law that is always wanting to talk about woke culture run amok, or the PC police coming after everyone for just speaking their minds. But the percentage of guys like that in middle age, that actually like to read books might be negligible these days. I think they read the internet. Or they just watch TV. I don't fucking know. But not that the book is anti-woke. We're not talking about the Turner Diaries here, after all. But it appeals, I think, to the early 80s macho attitudes that certain dudes would love to take a bath in for a few hours a day. They used to live there 24 hours a day, and now they're happy if they can at least get back to a little taste of it. And I think that's appropriate for an appropriate way to enjoy it. Now, if you're not that kind of guy, and I'm not, you can still enjoy the hell out of this story, because on a wider scale, it's a tale of oppression, class warfare. It also functions as an action-packed yarn of one man against the system. Also, this is early, horny Stephen King writing. Think of that. Consider that inexplicable boner and groping scene from The Raft, if you want to know what I'm talking about. It's that. It's that still kind of fresh out of his time writing for men's magazines, writing very, fairly objectionable stuff or vulgar stuff, because he's got a readership full of perverts that don't care who Stephen King really is or what he really wants to write. So I think a lot of his early work was influenced by that sort of practice. And then he grew into something else. I love that the old stuff is preserved and you can go back to it anytime you want to, but I'm happier that he moved forward and he grew. So, of course, as I already said, I highly recommend this book if you're the kind of person who hits those markers I talked about earlier, those requirements. If you can get into a story and have fun with it, even though you don't agree with every single little thing that every single person says, I think it's a worthy exercise. It's a romp. It's pretty badass.
Look at that. What about that? I don't want it. I don't want it.
Mild spoiler here about some of the action, but it happens fairly early in the chase. There is a scene where our hero blows up a YMCA, murdering who knows how many hundreds of innocent people. And what do YMCAs usually house? Families, children during the day that are there to like have a basketball game or take a mom's, dad's having a fitness class, neighborhood kids that have a little league of some kind, somebody on the pickleball court, or a bunch of older folks in a swimming class, or children learning how to swim for the first time. That's but Ben Richards suspects that there's a couple of guys standing around outside the building that might be tracking him. He doesn't have any proof of this, and he murdered. But the book doesn't go into the details of who the hell else is in the building. So I had to so that's me extrapolating it for myself. That's one of I would say, again, something that could have been developed. That's sort of a failing of this narrative that I don't really dig. But I did like that. I liked that action. I liked the fact that our character is willing to do that. Like I said, I'm kind of a dirtbag.
A charade, a conspiracy, a sham. We've been conned, hoodwinked, bamboozled, flim-flammed, and the wool pulled over our eyes even.
For the other Bachman books, I've personally had a great time reading Blaze and The Regulators, but that's all I've experienced for now. My plan is to move on to Roadwork and Rage next. I know both of them probably are going to hit me in the same like murderous, revenge-oriented kind of part of my evil heart that loves the part that loves reading Punisher stories or other Garth Ennis works from time to time. A note about the Rage, if you don't know, it is not available to read anywhere unless you are willing to pay hundreds of dollars for a used copy somewhere, or you can simply go to the Internet Archive at archive.org, sign up with some logins with your email, and check out the book that has been scanned up to that platform that is still currently available. The original 1980s edition that was released with all of those first Bachman books, not including the regulars, not including, I don't think Blaze is included. I might be wrong. But it's got Roadwork, it's got the Rage, Running Man, and The Long Walk. I believe is there might be one more. I'm not going to look it up. You know, if you already know better than me, great. You don't need me to tell you. The Rage, the plot of Rage was apparently too similar to many repeated real-world events that have occurred since the Columbine Massacre of 1999 for Mr. King's taste, and thus he had it pulled from publication. I say all this because when you get to the end of The Running Man, again, not explicitly going to spoil anything, you will also likely be reminded of real-world events that have occurred since the time of this publishing that would make a publisher today, if this was a brand new book, go, I don't know if we can get behind that. People are going to get upset. Maybe not. Maybe it's far enough apart from that. Who knows? So, overall, you've got all my thoughts on this story now. Overall, you've got enough of my background as a reader and as a Stephen King fan to decide if my opinions are of any use to you. As I said, there's other stuff you can click on here on my channel. Most of it's music oriented. There's a lot of narration, and I will probably think about doing more Stephen King reviews and other book reviews in the future. I do hope you liked it. I hope it was informative. I hope it was thought-provoking. I wouldn't mind if you subscribed or liked it. That would probably help me out, but I'm pretty sure the algorithm is stacked against all, or if not most of us, when it comes to being a small creator that just does this when they can, not cranking out 10 videos a day about whatever just happened in pop culture. So, luckily, we'll all be at war with Mars soon, and it'll be over. All the struggling, all the ambition will come to an end. Cheers.
Boom! Boom! Suck it, man. So, what do you think about that? It just collapsed all your objections, right?